Nice to see you all here today. My talk is called The Celebration of Trees. One of the things I tried to do today was take a positive approach to trees, because it's the tendency, certainly on my part, to be frustrated and angry most of the time because a lot of trees we're losing a lot of trees. At any rate, shall we carry on? Oh, wrong button. I do have to get a hang of these things from a different perspective. And you can see the perspective right there. We have a very fortunate relationship with somebody who has made it possible for us to put a drone up. The Penticton Trees Group, and that's Lynn Walford. Thank you very much, wherever you are. There you are. And we also had great support from the drone operator himself, because it was very challenging. It turned out to be an overcast day, and you have to put your drone up when you have a permit, otherwise you don't go at all. So that's how we started this whole process. And I just wanted to remind you that our city bylaws are interesting, because the trees, which I forgot to mention, right about there, at the corner of Martin and Eckert, and that's those trees right up there at the top, are not included in our bylaw. But these trees right here, or the remnants, belong to the city. These are in Lackawanna Park, and those, of course, are on the corner of Martin and Eckert. Come on, go. All right. Well, another thing about our trees locally is they're not really considered part of our infrastructure, which is an odd sort of thing when you think about it, because an infrastructure is a basic system. The physical structures and facilities that comprise a healthy, functioning community. And I think our tree canopy is an essential element of our infrastructure. And you know, it involves little guys like these, because the trees are part of the wildlife habitat. And I like to think that habitat includes us. It's not just the birds. So just a quick run through of some of the things that we need to remember about trees that makes it significant to have them in our world. Provides unique and powerful benefits for human and wildlife habitat. And number one, provides food protection nesting sites. This is a western kingbird, which is not that often in the city, but it's a nice picture. Our trees store carbon, that's pretty much understood by everyone now. Reduces stress and anxiety just walking into the trees. In fact, I found while I was putting this presentation together, I felt better when I was looking at the pictures of the trees. Boosts physical and mental health. And there's a couple more things that I'd like to add to that, for the reason that recent research is indicating that children who can experience a natural habitat, a green area with trees, if they have asthma, they're going to have a positive impact. It reduces some of the symptoms. And it's apparently, they're doing research on it right now, to find out how much impact trees have on ADHD. I knew you could help me. Thank you. ADHD? Oh, good. All right. And strangely enough, and I didn't really want to have to bring this in, but I will mention it because this community is quite concerned about crime. There has been research recently that's discovering that a green space has had a positive impact on crime stats. I'm not talking the shrubbery, but probably bigger tree growths. It reduces air pollution. We're all on side pretty much with that one. And reduces runoff, protects wetlands, reduces flooding and erosion, which is quite an important contribution locally, especially with slides and things that are happening on our hillsides that are stabilized by trees. So there you go. These trees are some of our best friends. Their role in our lives is worth celebrating, and that's what I wanted to do today. This is what started it all for me. Does anybody recognize this street? Hallelujah. Yes, it's Westminster. And these trees were planted about 70 to 75 years ago because this was considered the access that they wanted to celebrate access to coming into Penticton. Beautiful trees. They are American elms. Some people don't like those. But they've done rather well, and apparently they're very well and long-lived. These are healthy at the moment. There's one that's struggling now because it was by the hotel, and I think its roots got clipped. And again, this is a scarlet oak that was planted by a group called Penticton Trees I started on Facebook, and we're moving along trying to bring awareness to our tree situation. This was our tree social, and some people are calling it our inaugural tree social, so I suppose that commits us to doing it again sometime, where people get together and talk about trees and maybe plant some. And I just spent 5 days filling in the form of one of 3 people, filling in a form for a grant to plant 10 more trees. And I must admit, that's actually Naramata. I did include it partly because it's a really nice photograph. I took it. But secondly, Naramata is just overrun with trees, except for the hillsides where some people are taking them down at great rate. I don't think don't go again, thank you. Okay, so what we did with the drone was put it up at least five locations over the city and to have a look at things and see what's really going on. And what I wanted to do with the images that I brought to you today is to look at the areas that do have trees. And a lot of trees, like right here, if I can manage this. Whoops, that was the wrong button. I'm really good at that. Really good at that. There you go. Right here, this is this whole area is a park. And these trees are just as seen from the road there. When I was cycling one day, I was really taken with the fact that this is a really nice natural area. And of course, there's the community garden there as well. And then the other aspect is that just simply because, and it's changing rather rapidly now, but most of the homes have trees as well. And then you can see coming off right there is a KVR, and that's a beautiful treed location for the most part. Again, the reason it's treed is simply you can't put a house here. Not because the KVR is here, but because of the slope, the silt banks, and the trees are stabilizing them. Now we're down in another part of town. I'm going to try and move you around the town in some kind of order, but you might get whiplash every occasionally. You can obviously see the highlights here, and whoops, where are we? Whoop, wrong button. How many did I go ahead there? Yeah. Way over here is at Campbell Mountain, and of course there is a development proposed right about there. But this is just beautiful to me. Lovely private homes with lots of trees along the river. Well, there were. They're bringing those back. And slowly. They don't grow as fast as they used to. And then this is our downtown. Now, a little bit is sneaking in here about a problem we do have, which is called the heat island effect, right over here, where there aren't a lot of trees. The lower part of Maine has a good bit of trees that have been added, and they get progressively taller as you go down Maine till you get to the end. But as you walk up Maine, it just depletes. But one of the things I also noticed from these aerials is that we often talk about the K streets as being beautifully treed, with historic trees. And this neighborhood, Van Horn, Braid Street, etc., right down here in this whole area. Just look at Van Horn. This is extraordinary. Now, one of the things is some of these trees do belong to the city, and some of them don't. So they get varying degrees of attention. And then this is, well, for one thing I'll mention, this is Westminster Avenue right here. Look at that. Just unreal. This little area, I hate to mention it, but it's all slated to be gone, probably, and not too. It's part of this Northwest Development area. And the city has proposed that they will be doing some more trees and stuff along the highway there as it comes in on Eckert. But again, when you see Penticton from this perspective, it suddenly looks quite what I found while I was doing this was just rediscovering the city in a way, because I hadn't realized. Now we're up, has anybody got a guess where we are? We're up on the east side, and there's Upper Duncan. I call it Upper Duncan. Whoa, don't do that, Diane. Hit the right button. I'm not good at this. No, I'm not good at this. Technology was never my strong suit. Okay, I call it Upper Duncan, but you can see you come up onto the upper level there with, part of the silt bank along the far edge there. Right here. This is, at this point, you're up above. And there's McNichol Park down below. And again, another area that I realized it's got some nice trees along the edge and stuff. Now, one other thing I found while I was doing this was to discover areas I don't think I'd ever seen. And if you notice right here, if we can manage this, see this area here? This is quite heavily treed. Come on, when I want it to go, it doesn't go. There we go. Okay, this is the same neighborhood. Look at this. I think I'd love to live there. Now, one of the things we can probably date this development by the trees. You can see up in the corner there, that's actually on the property looking into the development. And the trees are spectacular. It's probably one of the more heavily treed, and a lot of you will notice are even evergreens as well as deciduous trees. And I just found, I was really startled, but I would estimate that this development would have to be 35 to 40 years old at least if the trees were planted when the houses were built. But that gives us an idea how important it is to have some forward thinking. Because what we build now, if we don't even put the trees in, we're not going to have that in 40 years. So I was really excited by that. Come on, there you go. Now this is another view I really enjoyed working with and playing with. Because again, we're back a little bit focused in that area. There's Eckert and Main right there. And this is Main Street going along here. And here we are, right, probably right about there. And again, this little green space, this is all parks land and maintained by parks. This is private, so those trees are on their own. I don't know what the plans are for that property, whether the people, I know the property back there on the corner, I can't tell exactly. There's a house back there that's been for sale. It's right across, well, it's near, yeah, it's just down the way a little bit. And the other thing I have noticed is I really appreciate this green, like it just makes this whole area beautiful to visit, to walk through, cycle through, even to drive through. And I think we don't really even recognize this is happening to us, that we pass through these areas that are really significant. And again, the trees are not young. These trees against the city, the school here, across from the library, are probably, again, in the 40s, maybe even 50-year-old range. Again, Chandra might be able to address that. Oh, I want to stay there for a minute. Good thing it didn't pass on. Over here, right about in here somewhere, maybe those trees, I'm not sure. But this is what happened to them. This is the Latimer Street challenge solved. At one point, the city was, the neighbors, I don't know who was, the trees were suffering because, of course, people could park right against their roots, and over the roots, in fact. And the city made a decision that was quite unique in the sense that this kind of extra boulevard was extended, so changed the parking along there. They got mulch on their roots, which is good for them. They've got more room around the roots. They don't have grass right up against them as they did here. All issues that are problematic for trees. And the city, this was a city project and was done. Yay, yeah, right on. Okay, so that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, is where we've done the right thing and we can celebrate that. Okay, just another look, a place to kind of wander around for a few minutes. Has anybody found their own home yet? No? Okay. Well, we know it's possibly been happening right over here recently. That's that hillside along there above these houses that was under threat. I'm not sure if that exact spot or somewhere, but it's on that hillside. But these trees on the hillside are significant because they help stabilize it. This is the river course, and of course there's a path going all along there through the trees. It's beautiful. One of the other features I think needs noting is that we do have these silt banks, and because they can't be built on, we still have trees on them, and I think that's truly wonderful too. Whoa, I better move along here. And again, we're up above on the sort of what I call the upper Duncan area. Anybody know where that one is? Okay. Yeah, Cherry Lane right here. Aspen. Oh, no, not Aspen. Athens Creek, yes, thank you. It's all written up there, so I should read it, right? That would be good. This is a school grounds that has quite a few trees, but I've just helped work on a grant to plant 10 more. So, and the other feature of this area that I think is really unique, first of all, we're building towers, at least we're encouraged here to build towers. We want more 6-story to even 12-story buildings to increase the density. Well, these buildings are those heights. From the street level along here, you don't hardly see them because there are trees. And secondly, this is an old stream course. It's called Athens Creek. How about that? It's, well, gosh, I think that's really, there's what it looks like. I'm not, no, it's, well, I should find it, I think it's not, because it was the, I understand it was the function of the development. And these are just some other ones that have struck my attention. One of them is one of the places that we don't have trees and are very problematic, because I've registered temperatures of 56 degrees centigrade in some of the local parking lots. So we can plant trees, and the argument uses, well, A, we don't have room, and B, it's a lot of work, and then we'd have to maintain them, and blah, blah, blah. Well, over here is the parking lot at the college, and they've got tree boulevards all through it. They even have rain swales. In other words, the rain that falls is directed off the parking lot into the trees. So I think it's something that can be done. And the whole campus is really quite nicely treed, as you probably know. And then the other one up at the top there, can anybody read that? I can't remember what it says. No, I think it's a school ground. No, it's the McNichol playing field. Forest Brook, it's up on Forest Brook. Okay. At any rate, again, I admired the fact that there was trees. You know, when you don't actually have to put them in. We don't have any rule about that, so you can just do whatever you like. Okay, this is the south end. There we have some towers, and I don't think there's a lot of trees around there. In fact, there's not a lot of trees here at all. I thought this was kind of nice with some green space, but of course on a density factor it wouldn't be a very popular. None of these would meet the density requirements at the moment. But I kept looking around here. Of course this is along Skaha Lake, so there's trees there. They are under challenge now, partly for reasons of drought, but also because I gather somebody explained to me it had to do with the way they're watered. They're watered like grass, and grass gets watered more frequently than trees need, and trees need more dense watering. But while I was looking at this, I noticed this little bunch of trees here. And so I took myself on a Google road trip. I was very surprised I could actually come along here and go in behind there. And this is what I discovered there. These are probably 40-year-old cottonwoods, I think. And guess where it is? It's behind the Best Western. This is their parking lot. This is their parking lot. Now those trees have had to be there for a while, so somebody did some thinking. I don't know whether the trees appeared and then I don't know the history of the Best Western, but I was a bit surprised. So in this rather big area, this is one area where there's some trees, and then there's trees along there that are actually city trees, and they're still young, so they're recent. How am I doing? 5 more minutes about? Okay. Now, do you know where this area is? What do we have over here? We have, that's South Main. This is the senior center. This is something interesting called Robinson Park or something. And of course that's partly used, maintained and used by the senior center. This is another case where when I do read the real estate ads, I have no idea why, because I don't need a property. But I have noticed that of the places to look in this town, that's one of the less expensive places. But look at the trees on that property. Somebody put those trees in. It wasn't a factor. It had nothing. Well, even in the backyards, look at people because I think, you know, you set a scene and then you increase people's participation. I think, you know, there's just, in fact, these look like locust trees, honey locust, maybe. It just startled me. However, right about here, there are 2 square blocks of absolutely unadulterated grass at the Princess Margaret School ground, which kind of surprised me. So if anybody wants to do another grant, we could probably put some trees there. And again, you know, the reason that I thought I'm not sure about this is a private property over here, but there's trees there. At any rate, this is what I've been doing. I just love looking at these aerials. Okay, now we're looking, I hope you know where you are. Nobody had whiplash yet? This is this is the intersection. There's South Skaha, turns into Skaha Lake Road there and becomes South Main there, I believe. Is that how it works? Yes? Hallelujah, we did it. Okay, so again, look at this lovely, there's one spot right about there. We were called, Penticton Trees is kind of a lightning rod organization. When people see somebody about to take a tree down, they put it on our page, and somebody, often me, goes running over there to find out what's going on. And what was happening there was the city was doing the road in between here, and had kind of back their trucks right up against the trees. These trees are on that private property there that's called the Somerset Plaza, and they are honey locust trees. They're beautiful. So I'm kind of, you know, I start to feel, I feel kind of possessive about a lot of these areas that I've had some interaction with. Here we're at the Cherry Lane Mall, parking lot. There are trees there. Somebody has been repeatedly pointing out that they're not being necessarily well cared for. Something else that kind of blows my mind, this street in here behind South Main, look at all the trees on there. It's just interesting. This is, of course, one of the silt banks, and that's not getting developed. And I just thought I'd expand the view a little bit, partly because what happens here is we see more of the parking lots at the Cherry Lane Mall, and there are a few trees there, as I said. This is interesting because this is something else people have contacted Penticton Trees about. They said these trees were looking very unhealthy. They are obviously on the property. They're not public trees. They're property of the superstore right back up here. And they have other trees, but they're looking fairly good. Either that or that hole indicates where they used to be. I wonder. But one of the things I already mentioned is that the temperature range, these are what we call heat islands, and areas like that have trees, I call tree, what do I call them? Tree oasis. That's a tree oasis there, and tree oasis. At any rate, the temperatures are just astonishing in these untreed areas where just the heat builds up incredibly. Even the surfaces of these building roofs probably are in that range. They're just radiating heat. Now, this is sort of a positive in a sort of odd way, in that I keep noticing this building going up. It's practically across the street from us here. And I kept noticing that this tree was behind a barrier and still there. It's been there through the entire construction, which I thought, that is unique. They do not normally survive. And I'm not sure it will, because there's been a lot of traffic over the area. The other thing is there's this tree in here behind this fence. Now it looks a little bit like it might be a tree of heaven, yes, tree of heaven. And so I think their goodwill maybe extends a little too far, but it's just unique. There's the shrubbery's been maintained. I can't believe it. Mind you, the units are going for almost $800 a piece, and there's 8 of them where one house used to exist. So that we've even, I think you get merit points even for a tree of heaven under those circumstances. Anyway, this is what Penticton looks like in the fall on the promenade along the lake shore. A lot of poplar here, aspen. One of the things that people get concerned about, they say we add trees and they're going to burn. Well, actually, some deciduous trees are quite good at handling fire and may even, you know, have a kind of dampening effect. So it's something to consider. We don't have to assume all the worst for every tree that goes in. In fact, if we put the right trees in, and that's really a big function of what we need to do. And the other thing I just want to point out is somewhere in this town you're just going along and you go around a corner and you see something like this. I've had trouble trying to figure out what kind of tree it is, but it's glorious and well worth having a visit with when you go by. So thank you very much. That's my portion.
Thank you, Dianne. That was great. It was a wonderful tour around Penticton and highlighting some of the things that I'm going to be talking about. Because I think one thing that Dianne and I definitely share is a love of all the trees in Penticton and how you can go around a block and see, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that tree existed. How could I have missed that particular tree? There are some real beauties here. And as I work at the museum, my approach to this presentation, my presentation will be about a historical focus. And we're not actually going to go back too far. We're going to go back about 20 years. Now let's see, because that's when the tree protection that we have in place for the city was put in place, and that was with a city bylaw. And when I read over the bylaw, it's pretty straightforward, and it focuses mainly on trees that are on city property. So this was a way to protect trees that are on city property. And they had an appendix, and they had a list of some of the historic and significant trees. And so we're talking in 2001, somebody made a list and said we should have these trees protected, or keep in mind that they're important for Penticton. And so what I did was I went back to that list, let's see, and I looked at the list and said, okay, let's see where they are like 20 years later. So on the list itself, and you can actually go on to the internet and you put in Penticton Historic Significant Tree Bylaw, and you'll come up with the bylaw, and at the end of the bylaw you get the list. And there were 32 entries on that list, and they represent either individual trees or groups of trees. And so I kind of clumped it up, and I said, okay, there's 15 individual trees, and then there's 17 locations with 2 or more trees. And so some of those locations are like Skaha Park, so way more than 2 trees. What else? And of course, because it was a bylaw protecting, or keep trying to protect city-owned trees, there were 8 of them that were listed as city-owned, and 2 of them were individual trees, and 6 of them were multiple tree groups. Sorry, okay. And so, like I said, Skaha Park would be an example of one. And then we have the cemetery, and those trees were put in around 1912. We had an article in the newspaper that talked about a group of people going out, and mostly boys, and then the editor in the newspaper is like, how come you guys didn't show up? You said you were going to show up and help plant those trees, and we ended up with like 5 people and 10 kids. So we have them to thank for planting those trees. And then Dianne mentioned Robinson Park, which is by the Senior Center on South Main, and that is a list of trees. And what's interesting about that particular listing, it says a number of trees to be identified. So they never actually identified which trees were to be protected, but they said, we know Robinson Park is one of those areas. And then these trees, can you guess where that is? I know it's a small picture, but they put this, yes, it's on Latimer Street. And on the list, it has 4 maples, and one of them has passed away, so now we only have 3. The sidewalk used to go between the rock, or the wall here, and the trees, but they've grown enough that they put in a boulevard about 2 years ago on the outside of those trees. So the city is protecting those trees, which is what we want to see. Well, I do anyways. And then I was like, okay, well, how old are these trees, right? Because they're historic trees. And of that 32 listing of trees, only 13 have dates. So we're going to have to guess and kind of do our hypotheses and our estimated guesses based on when the buildings that were built there. So we have, I have listings for between 1902 and 1910. There were 9 trees, so that would make them over 120 years old. And let me just see, I think I wrote down notes here, yes, so we would know. And then many of you understand this problem. Okay, I can't read and see far distances at the same time. So we're talking like the 1902 tree is the Fairview Cemetery tree. And then the maple tree, there's a maple tree at Martin and Eckert, which was planted in 1906. There's a listing that says Argyle, Eckert, Woodruff, 1910. And so that's all I had to go on. So And then maples at the library parking lot and the north end, so along the side here, and then there's that huge maple over there, and they're from 1909. There's the trees at the Cleland home, which is up on Upper Bench, and they were planted in 1910. And we have Middle Bench has some trees that were planted in 1910 as well, and they're up by Upland School. There's maples on Abbott Street, and they were planted around 1910. And then Norton Street, 1910, Cambie Street, 1910. So quite a number of trees, and I'm going to talk, this is what's on the list right now, and I'll talk about what I found when I got there. So I just wanted you to get a sense of how old some of these trees might be. We have the 1911s to 1930s, and we have multiple trees that are 100+ years old here in Penticton. So we've got there is a tree at Haven Hill Hospital. So if you know where the Haven Hill Care Center is, there used to be a hospital there. It was taken down and then replaced with the Haven Hill Care Home. So you can imagine what happened to that tree. And then Gyro Park has some trees that were planted in 1920. And then there's a listing that says Darrington apples, 1920s to 1930s. And I'll tell you, I had a bit of time trying to find that particular tree or trees. I wasn't sure. And then we have 1955, there were multiple trees, and Queen's Park School was one of those listed there. So, and then as we keep talking about the tree species, we had cottonwoods on there, and that's my son climbing the cottonwood for scale. We had ponderosa pine, so those are two native species here in the Okanagan. We had maples of various kinds, so here's the maple by the library. You can see the fountain here. And this one is it's a Manitoba maple, and I've forgotten which street it's on. Granby Avenue. And it's a single tree. We've got the elms, which Dianne talked to us about. And when you go see those trees, try and look for the line. That's the grafting line. That tells you that there was one species of elm that was put in the ground, and the other is a different species that's put up on top. To make it so that they branch out, because elms normally go straight up and down. So this was a way to get the overhang that we love on that road on Westminster and Power Street. So we have elms, oaks, apple, maple. There's a butternut on there, many London planes. There's a copper beech and a ponderosa pine, and then the poplar cottonwoods as well. So that's what we'll find when you go to that particular list. Now, 20 years later, okay, and this is one of those trees, 20 years later. This is on Edmonton Avenue. It's a sweet chestnut. So it actually produces the chestnuts that we roast over the open fire. When I went to take a picture of it, the people who live there, "What are you doing taking a picture of my tree?" So I told them, and they're like, "We get 20 bags of leaves at the end of each fall." Which is quite noteworthy. And then also, if you've ever picked chestnuts, you know that they have this super spiky casing around the actual nut. So I can't imagine like raking them up and then carefully putting them into a bag. Yeah. So the ground truthing. I went out there. We have about 40+ trees that are missing. It was hard to tell because some of the trees at Skaha Park, which is on the list, of course, came down in 2008. And I couldn't get an actual number of how many trees came down. 6 of them I know were individual trees, which I couldn't find at the locations. And come on. One was a group of 15 trees that was at this is the newer hospital, not the old hospital in Haven Hill, but the one where it's presently located. So we've had quite a lot of construction there and additions put on, so those trees are not there any longer. And then there was one group of 20 trees at the Cleland property, and it sounds like a lot when you say 20 trees are missing, but then Mary Lynn Barney was so nice to let me come up and take a look at the property, and so there's the house there. And what's lovely, like you go up the road and you have all these little trees that are starting to grow. They took down these cottonwoods I guess within the last 5 or 10 years, because cottonwoods do age over time and go rotten in the center, and the last thing you want it to do is fall on your house. So you do have to keep in mind that trees have a finite lifespan. But what has happened, when I was there, I could hear all these birds in those trees. And so it was like the tree oasis, right? Where you have a place for nature to live. And they have all grown up naturally. Either the tree or the birds brought in the seeds, or they were self-seeded, and it's made quite a nice little natural area in that spot. So even though we're missing those 20 trees that were on the list, I think they've made up for it by having this little grove of trees. I didn't want to go through the entire list because that's 32 spots, and I want to make sure we have enough time for both of us to do our presentation, but I thought I would highlight some of the trees of note that I came across. So this is the chestnut that I was talking about earlier, and sometimes me and dates don't stay together very well, so I wrote down some dates here. This one is on Edmonton Avenue. It's at 150 Edmonton Avenue. It's on a private property, and the folks who have bought it are making sure that they maintain the historic property of the house because it is on the Heritage Registry. It was Captain Stevens' house, and he built it in 1907, and Captain is not in relation to the boats, the lake boats here, but more in relation to being part of the armed forces. And Captain I.M. Stevens, and didn't find out what I.M. stands for, but he was a councillor here in Penticton, and he was a reeve, which is like an early form of a mayor, and he also was a real estate agent. So, and he built a really nice house, and he planted this chestnut tree that, you know, if it was built in 1907, we can do some guesstimating. It could be, you know, this is one of the over 100-year-old trees we have in Penticton. The other tree, this one is the Copper Beech, and it's on McMillan Avenue. And I, for the longest time, didn't know where this was because as you're driving towards Naramata, you just zip past it because it's on the curve that goes around. So if you go past the turn to Munson's Mountain and you go around the curve, there's a house on this side, and you're like, oh, that's a nice house, and then you zip around that way and you keep going straight past the winery. It's on your left-hand side. And it's way in the back. There's all this greenery that's in front of it, so you don't see it very well in the summertime. And hidden behind it is another historic home. It's it was a house that was built in 1927 by Major E.C. Holden, and he again was a councillor and part of the Penticton's fruit industry. He designed actually the first cold storage for the Penticton Fruit Company here in Penticton. So, and there's a long story behind, well, a deeper story behind the house, but I won't go into it right now. But this tree is quite amazing in that it is a copper beech and quite unique for Penticton. And then there's this one, the butternut on Victoria Drive. And if you go down Victoria Drive, you will see big trees, big trees, big trees, and none of them are on the list, but this butternut is on the list. So it's in the backyard, so you could go down the alley and take a look at it. And I know the people who live there, and so we talked about it, and they've looked at aerial photos, and we think based on the aerial photos, it's about 60 or 70 years old because for a while there it's not there and then it is there. So based on that, we were guessing it's about a 60 or 70-year-old tree. But I mean, that's a good amount of years to put on that tree. Another tree that I found was this one on Van Horn Street, which is, you just go up Vancouver Hill and you turn right onto Van Horn and you'll see it on your right. And for me, it was like one of the sadder ones to find because it's sandwiched between these two properties, which are little tiny houses, and it doesn't look like it's doing very well. And it's a fir tree, so it's a true fir, so it'll have those cones that sit upright on the branches. But it probably is having a little challenge there, stuck between two houses, and when I looked, there was no grass, so you wonder how much water it's getting. So it's a very challenged tree. It was challenging to take a photo of it too. What else do we have here? I found the Darrington apple, or what I think it is. So on the list it says Darrington, and I was like, okay, internet, help me out here. Darrington apple. So there's no variety of Darrington apple. And it's like, okay, what else? And so I talked to Randy Manuel, who's a historian here in town, and he says, I wonder if that's the Barrington apple. And Barrington Street is up on, if you go Haven Hill, and then if you go off to the left into that area, there's a Barrington Street. And I was like, I know somebody who lives on Barrington Street, and I also know she's got apple trees in her backyard. I wonder. So this is our best guess of what the apple trees were, because these are the ones that were planted in the 1920s and the 1930s, and it's a remnant of one of the original orchards that were there. And I have tasted those apples and made applesauce, and they are very good apples. So that's Jean, who was the previous archivist here with us, so that's her property. So I was happy to find that tree. Here we are at the Robinson property, and this, any guesses? Well, I've already told you what it is. Don't read that. No. This is a redwood, and this is a ginkgo. And if I were to stand to the ginkgo, I would probably be about this tall. So it's quite a big tree, and I had no idea that ginkgos could get that big. And then I went on Cleland Drive. I have a friend who's up on Cleland Drive, and I drove up there, and right in front of her house I'm like, that's a ginkgo. And the ginkgos they're really special to me, because when I studied my biology, it was like, these are one of those prehistoric trees. They've got all the veins going parallel, and they make this kind of fan-shaped leaf to it. And so for me, in my mind, these are the trees of the dinosaurs. So I always really enjoy being able to find ginkgos. And then to see one get so big, like, that is just impressive. And the Robinsons were, they actually were, I think one of them was a florist and one of them was a landscaper. And so that whole property, they would plant trees that were, they could grow them because they knew what they were doing with plants. And so and then it was donated to the city. And so that's why we have some of these unique species like the redwood and the ginkgo there.
Tree right beside that tree, tall, whitish.
This one? My best guess is it's a spruce. Yeah. Anybody else? Spruce, just because of the color of the needles. The best way to tell if it's a spruce is you go and you touch it. And spruce have spiky needles, so I always remember spruce are spiky. And if you touch it and it's not, then it's not a spruce. I'm not sure. So I have an admission to make. I studied biology and I focused on native plants, and I hardly ever focused on trees that are plants that grow in our yards and our landscaping. So sometimes people will be, what's this tree? And I'm like, I have no idea. So my best guess is it's a spruce.
Beautiful red.
Yes, it is. And actually, what I was happy to see, because I had seen this tree 2 summers ago, and it was more red because we had our first bout of drought in the summer. And the city, of course, the city staff are taking care of the trees, and it is actually in better condition when I first saw it. So I was happy to see that. Okay, but what about these trees? Okay, so Dianne right? This is Martin Street here and Eckert Street here. These oak trees are not on the list. However, I'm all about trees. This house is on a historic registry. So does that, and also it has a bylaw to protect this area. So does that mean that it's also protecting the trees? That's, you would think. Yes, Bob.
The trees would be described in the statement of significance if they're protected.
Okay, so the trees would be described in the statement of significance. So they would be included in the bylaw to protect it. Okay. So then we don't need anything to protect those trees because they're already protected.
We need to read the statement of significance.
Oh, we need to read the statement of significance. Okay.
That actually is a covenant, it's not a...
Sorry, thank you. I'm so glad that everybody's here to correct me because sometimes I get things wrong. Karen is telling us it's a covenant. That means that they are protected, or what can you share with us?
I'm not sure, because the covenant does cover the house, but I'm not sure about the trees.
Okay.
Your house is protected by a bylaw, so it also covers the grounds.
Okay, so you're saying that the Latimer house here has a covenant on it. We would have to look at the covenant to see if the trees are protected. Whereas something like the Lear house has a bylaw on it, and that includes the grounds around the Lear house. Thank you, everyone. It takes a village to know about the history of Penticton. All right. Do you recognize what kind of tree this is? I'll give you a hint. It loses its needles. It's a larch. Yeah. And it's on Victoria Avenue. And it's a beautiful tree too. And then this one is also on Victoria Avenue. You might recognize the house. This is a tulip tree. And it's one of the tallest trees on that block. How come those ones aren't there? I don't know. What else do we have? Oh yes, this one. I had to stop here. I don't know why it is, but in the fall, I always start talking about trees, and I should take pictures of trees, which always seems to coincide with the first week of school. And the first week of school is like a half day, and then I have to figure out what am I going to do with my kids for the rest of the half day. And so we go out and we take pictures of trees. And this one is great because my youngest here is standing on this where a plaque was at one time, and this is a tree that was planted by the students of Queen Park in 2001. And so 20 years later, this is the tree. It's still climbable safely, as my oldest is showing us. And it is a London plane tree in Lackawanna Park. And then there's these ones. And I just took this on the weekend because I'm like, oh, how have I not put these ones in here? So these, and I am guessing they're maple based on another photo that I saw. I haven't actually gone and seen the trees with their leaves on. So if anybody knows better than me, then please share it. This is on Penticton Avenue. And this is the Trotter residence, which is also protected, well, it's also on the Heritage Registry. And the sidewalk, again, used to go through here. Actually, when I first came to Penticton 15 years ago, I was wandering around the streets, because that's what I do, looking at all the different houses. And I noticed that those trees were in the middle of the sidewalk. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I think that means that those trees were there before the sidewalk was there. So I did a little research, and I found out that the Trotter House was built in 1913 by William Jackson Trotter, and he was a carpenter and a joiner, and he was working on the Encola Hotel. And he lived there with his wife, Edith, and their 3 daughters, Eva, Doris, I've got Eva, Doris, and Edith. So maybe one was named after them? Do you remember, Karen? No, okay. But we can go, later we can go into the museum and read the panel and get a better sense of who all those people who are living there. But they I'm thinking that house was there before the street was there, and those trees were planted in front of the house. And so again, the city's done a really nice job of widening it to protect the trees. I've heard some people complaining about, well, now you have to slow down if you want to pass somebody on that spot. But you know what? I think that's okay given the age of those trees. And I mean, part of the thing that we have to think about is that we know the house was built in 1913. We don't know exactly when those trees were planted. And so we would have to go and see if we can check some aerial photos and see if they were there, or find out what we can. But we know definitely after 1913 they were planted. So it's always tricky to determine the age of a tree, because without actually like coring through it, because if a tree is in really harsh conditions, it'll grow really small given its species, versus one that has optimal conditions, then it'll have a thicker trunk. So you can't actually tell the age of a tree by its trunk. You do actually have to core it.
How come we haven't tapped the old trees?
Well, I think probably because it costs money to do that, and then we don't tap them because it does cost money to tap them, and then also you're making a hole into the tree, so that opens if the tree is in optimal conditions, then it should be able to fight off any diseases or insect pests that are going to come along. So my guess is it's probably just people power and money that makes it so that we don't do that. And I think that if anybody was here for Thor Clausen's presentation, I think the arborists are able to sort of get a general idea of how old these trees are based on their experience, and so that gives us sort of a range of age rather than knowing exactly how old it is. So, it's good because I'm at my last slide. We're at the end here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Urban Forest Master Plan Review, because that's been going on for probably about a half year now. And when I checked in with the parks people, they said that the draft plan is coming out in January 2024. And so you will have opportunity to make comments on the plan, and there'll be in-person opportunity, there'll be online opportunity, and then also, and by online I mean like through Zoom, or you can actually like type your thoughts down in the computer. So that will be coming up, and there's your link. Go to the community tree plan on the Shape Your City, and hopefully this has given you some insight to some of the trees that we have here in Penticton, and maybe you want to delve deeper, and maybe you want to join the Penticton Trees Facebook group, because that's always a good place to go and be with other people who love trees. And as Dianne pointed out, sometimes people will say, oh, I see this tree is in danger, what can we find out about it? And thanks to a lot of Dianne's effort, as well as some other people, some of the trees we've been able to save, like the one on Edmonton Avenue and Manitoba. The developer wanted to take the trees down, and this is right by the Edmonton Avenue Child Care Center. And if you've ever gone there in the springtime, both sides are lined with linden trees, and which is lovely because they have a lovely aroma. And then they overhang the street, and it gives us that, I think this is it, is like the trees are what make us feel like we're in a cozy place, and this is our home in our community. And so, and I'm sure there's some sayings out there about how, the people who planted the trees were not thinking about themselves, they were thinking about the people coming in the future. And I think that's where we should be as well, is thinking about what are we going to be leaving for our kids and our grandkids and the people coming in down the road, because they certainly give a feeling to our city. And I mean, there's the question too about how far back do we go, because if we go back before Penticton was here, it was all grassland and Ponderosa pine parkland in some areas. So we are bringing in non-native species and sort of colonizing an area, if you want to put it that way, and changing it. But I think, given the circumstances with how our climate is changing, we might want to have a few extra trees that bring the temperature down a bit, because it's gonna get hot.